Tessaria's voice cracked as she screamed, "You can't take my brothers!" But no one stopped the black carriage as it rolled to a halt in front of the courthouse. Her arms were wrapped around Bram and Jude, their thin faces buried against her dress, trembling. The crowd stood frozen under the high noon sun, watching with a mix of discomfort and curiosity as Mrs. Eleanora Vale stepped down from the carriage in her polished boots and blue traveling hat. The woman didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even acknowledge Tessaria's panic. She reached into her leather purse and pulled out a velvet pouch, then let it drop into the marshal's palm. The sound of coins clinking was louder than Tessaria's cries. "That's gold," someone muttered from the crowd. "Real gold." The marshal looked sick, but he nodded. "The papers are signed. The town council approved it." Tessaria dropped to her knees in the dust, clawing at the hem of Eleanora's skirt. "Please, ma'am, they're all I got. They're my blood. I raise 'em myself." But Eleanora simply stepped back, adjusting her gloves as if brushing off a speck of dirt. "You're a child playing house," she said flatly. "I'm offering them food, shelter, and a future." She turned to the boys. "Come." Bram shook his head violently, tears streaking his cheeks, while Jude hid behind Tessaria's back. Tessaria wrapped her arms tighter. "They won't go. They won't." The marshal took a step forward, regret in his eyes, but not enough to stop him. "I'm sorry, Tess. There's nothing in the book saying you're their legal kin now. You've got no deed, no claim, no property. You're just 13. Eleanora's voice cut through him. 13 and penniless. What do you expect these boys to eat tomorrow? Tessaria looked up at the faces around her, familiar townsfolk who'd once handed her bread or tipped their hats, now silent, complicit. Her heart pounded, and she saw no mercy anywhere, just polite cowardice. When the boys were pried from her grip by 2 townmen, she didn't scream this time. She just collapsed to the ground, fists pounding the dirt. Eleanora walked away with the boys without a second glance. The crowd parted, and no one, not a single soul, stepped forward. Except one man. At the edge of the square, a rancher in a weather-worn hat leaned against a hitching post, watching. His name was Calder. He didn't speak, but his hand clenched slowly around the reins of his horse. Calder didn't know why he rode after the carriage. He told himself it was curiosity, or maybe something practical. The widow Vale was new to these parts, and a rancher ought to know his neighbors. But the truth pressed heavier than that. It was the way that girl collapsed, silent and shaking in the dirt. No theatrics, just devastation. He trailed the black carriage for 3 miles until it turned off the main road toward a hilltop estate, surrounded by white fencing and quiet wind. From a distance, Calder saw the boys being led inside like sheep. Bram looked back once, just once, and that was enough. Calder didn't ride closer. Not yet. Instead, he waited until dusk and returned to town. The square was empty now. The dust settled, the shame forgotten. But he found Tessaria sitting exactly where she'd fallen, legs crossed back against the post, eyes staring blankly. She didn't flinch when he approached. "Your brothers?" Calder said quietly. "You raised them yourself?" Tessaria didn't speak, just gave a small nod. "How long?" he asked. Her voice was gravel and grief. "Since I was 10, Mama died. Pa disappeared into a bottle. I cooked. I kept 'em warm. I made sure they prayed. That's what counts, right?" Calder said nothing. He sat beside her, stretching his long legs into the dirt. They watched the saloon lamps flicker to life. "She paid in gold," Tessaria whispered. "They always listen to gold." Calder reached into his coat and pulled out a folded slip of paper. "You know how to read?" Tessaria shook her head. He unfolded it slowly. "This here's a transfer of land deed. It belonged to a rancher who passed last year. No heirs, no wife. Just left it behind. I filed for it, claimed it. She turned her face to him, uncertain. Why you tellin' me? Calder's voice stayed even. Because a deed matters. You're right. It's what makes things legal. I'm gonna use mine. Her brow furrowed. Use it how? Calder stood and offered her his hand. You said they're your blood. You meant it. She hesitated, then placed her dirty palm in his. Then let's give you something legal to stand on. He pulled her up, gently, like someone handling broken glass, and for the first time that day, Tessaria didn't feel like a girl who'd lost. She felt like someone who still had a fight to give. Calder tipped his hat toward the hill. Tomorrow we ride. She nodded, not understanding the plan, but willing to follow the man who didn't look away. They left before dawn. Calder rode tall and steady, a quiet storm beside Tessaria's slimmer frame on the borrowed mare. He hadn't told her much, only that they'd be taking the land deed to Judge Alwyn before sunrise, and that if things went the way he hoped, she'd get her brothers back without begging. I don't want charity, Tessaria murmured as they rode. Calder didn't look at her. Ain't charity, it's law. By the time they reached the courthouse, the judge was still wiping sleep from his beard. Calder slapped the deed down and laid out the story in plain terms. The boys were taken without consent. The girl who raised them had no paper to prove blood or guardianship, but he had land, and the law loved land. If she's with me, Calder said calmly, she's got standing. Judge Alwyn studied the girl. Your name? Tessaria Flint. Age? 17. The judge scratched his chin. The widow Vale has legal claim. Payment rendered orphan boys. Technically fair. Except they're not orphans, Calder said. She's their blood. But no certificate. And I've got land. I can name her ward or wife if she says yes. Tessaria's head whipped toward him, stunned. What? Calder didn't flinch. It's a paper world, Tess. We play by its rules. The judge leaned back. You're saying you'd marry her, just to give her legal ground? I'm saying she raised those boys better than half the men I know. That should count for something. The silence grew thick. Tessaria stared at the floor. I don't want a husband out of pity. Calder's voice stayed soft. I'm not offering pity. I'm offering a way forward. The judge cleared his throat. Well, if she agrees, I can write the papers. Won't stop the widow Vale from contesting, but it'll give you something to stand on. Might even scare her off. Tessaria stepped outside for air. Her head spun, too much, too fast. But as she looked towards the hill where her brothers had vanished, her fists clenched. She didn't want a man. She wanted her boys. And Calder, he hadn't touched her, hadn't begged or bargained, just offered space to stand. She walked back in. Write it, she told the judge. Calder blinked, once, that was all. No celebration, no smile, just a nod. The pen scratched, the document sealed, and with that one quiet choice, Tessaria became someone the law could no longer ignore. The gold had taken her brothers. But maybe now, ink would bring them back. The widow Vale's coach was already parked in front of the church by the time Tessaria and Calder returned. It was gleaming black, too fine for the dust of their town, with silver trim and a door that opened without a sound. The boys were nowhere in sight. But Tessaria knew they were inside. Her fingers clenched at her skirt as Calder stepped ahead, official papers tucked in his saddlebag. You let me speak, he said low. Just once. She nodded, though her throat tightened. The church doors opened just as they approached, and there she stood. Madeline Vale, draped in mourning silk as black as ink, but with lips painted like crushed wine. Her gloved hand rested lightly on the shoulder of the youngest boy, Whitley, who looked pale and dressed in someone else's idea of presentable. "Ah," the widow drawled. "The child bride arrives." Tessaria flinched. Calder didn't. "We've come for the boys." "I paid in full," Madeline said, voice like satin stretched thin. 200 in gold. Clean transaction." "Not clean," Calder replied, pulling the deed from his saddlebag and unfolding the marriage certificate. "Miss Flint is now my wife, and by extension, guardian of her bloodkin. The court accepts it." Madeline's gaze flicked to the paper, then to Tessaria. "Wife, is she?" she purred. "I suppose the law loves a signature, but I doubt it'll survive a real trial." "We'll see," Calder said. "For now, we're taking the boys." "No." The word snapped out like a whip. "I have dresses being fitted. Tutors already wired for." Tessaria stepped forward then, trembling but firm. "They're not dolls. They're my brothers. And I raised them when no one else would. You want a showcase? Buy statues, not children." Whitley blinked at the sound of her voice. His lower lip trembled. Madeline's face remained unreadable. Then slowly she stepped aside. "Take them then, and take what comes with it. Poverty, sickness, hunger. You'll come crawling back." Calder moved first, gently guiding Whitley and Alden toward Tessaria, who fell to her knees and wrapped her arms around both. "We ain't ever coming back," she whispered into their hair. The widow turned without another word, disappearing into her carriage. As the door shut behind her, Tessaria looked at Calder, not with gratitude, but with something heavier. "Why did you really do it?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. Not yet. But the way he kept one hand lightly on her back, steady and quiet, told her the story wasn't finished. Only beginning. Tessaria didn't sleep the first night back in the ranch house. Not really. The boys curled on either side of her on the mattress, the only one big enough to hold them all. And though the wind outside was kind, her mind rattled like a broken shutter. Calder had gone out after dark, saying nothing, taking his rifle and a bottle of kerosene. But come morning, the barn was swept, the chicken coop mended, and a fresh pile of chopped wood leaned neatly against the porch. When she stepped outside, Tessaria found him seated at the edge of the corral, sharpening an axe that looked older than either of them. "They sleep okay?" he asked without turning. "Like they hadn't in weeks," she replied, arms crossed. "They talked in their sleep, about cold baths, heavy books, a woman with a mirror on her cane." Calder winced slightly, but said nothing. "Was it really legal?" she asked. "What we did?" He finally looked up, his eyes quiet as ever. "It was right," he said. "Sometimes that has to be enough." She stared at him for a long moment before nodding and stepping down the steps. "Then I guess we build this right, too." They spent the day rearranging what had once been a house made for one. Calder gave up his bed, moving to a cot near the stove. Tessaria scrubbed the kitchen until the boards gleamed, then pulled out the sewing kit and began stitching patches into the boys' old clothes while they built forts with firewood and named chickens after constellations. It felt like something between a beginning and a truce. That night, Whitley dragged his blanket down the hallway and curled up beside Calder's cot, wordless. Calder didn't send him back, just reached out, tugged the blanket properly over him, and went still. Tessaria watched from the doorframe, a mug of tea trembling in her hands. "He needs a father," she said softly. Calder didn't flinch. "I ain't much good with kids." "He thinks you're a giant." "I'm just tall." "He's never had anyone tall on his side." Calder looked up then, something unreadable behind the worn lines of his face. "You want me to be their father?" Tessaria hesitated, her voice catching. "I want someone who won't leave, who doesn't trade children for gold." There was silence. Then Calder stood, took the mug from her shaking hands, and placed it on the table without breaking eye contact. "Then I'll stay," he said simply. "If you'll let me." And for the first time in a long while, Tessaria felt like maybe, just maybe, someone meant it. That evening, as the boys played outside chasing each other through the high grass, Tessaria sat alone at the little writing desk Calder had dusted off and moved near the window. The golden hour sun caught the curls in her hair, now clean and pinned, and turned the old paper in her hands almost translucent. She had found it that morning, an unsent letter tucked between the floorboards of her late father's chest, long forgotten. It was addressed to the very orphanage where her brothers had been taken, dated a week before he died. In it, he had begged them to reconsider, had offered to mortgage the land to keep all 3 children together. "They are all I have left," he wrote in a shaky hand, "and they belong to each other more than to this world." Tessaria blinked back tears, tracing the faded words with her fingertips. Her father hadn't sold them off, not willingly. He'd tried so hard, and they never responded. She folded the letter and held it to her chest, as if it could reach backward through time and change things, but instead, it burned quietly in her ribs. Calder entered quietly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "They're chasing fireflies," he said. "I told them they could stay out till the sky turns violet." She nodded, then held out the letter. "My father, he didn't give them up easy." Calder read the note slowly, his lips tightening at the edges. "He was a good man, then. He died thinking he failed us. Then let's prove him wrong." She smiled sadly. "By raising them out here with nothing but chickens and prairie wind?" "With love," Calder said simply. "And with you." That startled her. "You don't even know me. I know you screamed for your brothers when no one else would. I know you came back for them when anyone else would have run. I know you sit in silence when it hurts the most. And I know they look at you like you hung the moon." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She had no words left to argue. Instead, she rose, crossed the room, and laid the letter gently into the fire. The flames curled around it, turning sorrow into smoke. Outside, Whitley's laughter echoed through the dusk. Calder placed a hand gently on her shoulder, not claiming her, not pushing her, just steadying. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." She closed her eyes and let the truth of that sink deep into her bones. For once, she didn't feel afraid to believe it. The next morning didn't begin with screams or stolen boots or worry. It began with the smell of bannock warming on the stove and the creak of the old ranch house settling under sunrise. Tessaria rose before the boys, stepping barefoot across the wooden floor, her long nightdress brushing against her calves. The stillness felt sacred, like the world had paused to allow her to breathe. She made her way outside, mug in hand, and stood on the porch Calder had repaired the day before. He was already there, shirt sleeves rolled up, oiling the hinges on the corral gate. He looked up when he heard her, and the smallest smile tugged at his face, like he hadn't expected her to come out, but was grateful she did. "Coffee?" she offered. He wiped his hands and took it from her, their fingers brushing. "Didn't think you'd sleep last night." "I didn't," she said, staring out at the vast field. "But it was the first night I didn't cry." Calder leaned against the porch rail, nodding. "They're different already," she added. "Whitley smiled in his sleep. I haven't seen that since—" Her voice caught. "Since Mama." Calder didn't speak, didn't press. That was what she was beginning to learn about him. He let the silence hold weight without trying to fill it. "You really think we can keep them?" she asked. He sipped slowly, eyes on the hills. If it were up to law, maybe not. But if it's up to love, we've already won. Behind them, little feet padded softly across the wood. Aubin, the youngest, appeared holding the wooden toy horse Calder had carved the night before. "Miss Tessaria," he whispered, "can we feed the hens again?" She knelt to him, brushing his hair aside. "Of course. But you have to teach Whitley how to be gentle with the eggs, remember?" Aubin grinned and nodded before running off to rouse his brother. Tessaria turned to Calder. "He called me Miss Tessaria, not sister." "It'll take time." "They're learning you're more than just their blood." "What am I?" "They're home." She looked away, embarrassed by the way that word made her chest ache. "I don't even know if I belong here, Calder," he shrugged, finishing his coffee. "Belonging ain't where you come from. It's where people are better because you stayed." Tessaria stared out over the quiet ranch as the sun spilled gold across the fields. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like someone waiting to be taken. She felt like someone finally choosing to stay. The dust hadn't even settled on their new peace when the sound of hooves shattered it. Calder was in the field with the older boys, teaching them to measure fence posts, when Tessaria spotted the buggy cresting the ridge. Her breath caught. There was only one person it could be. She stepped onto the porch just as the buggy came to a halt, and the rich widow descended in her travel cloak, the same one she'd worn when she took the boys. Only now, she wasn't smiling. She carried no gold, only a folded paper in her gloved hand. "Miss Tessaria," she said, her voice cold as porcelain, "I thought I'd find you hiding behind this broken old gate." Tessaria didn't flinch. "I'm not hiding. I'm raising the boys you left bleeding inside." The widow's mouth twitched. "I came with an offer. Not of money this time, but of finality." She handed over the paper. Tessaria opened it slowly. Legal language, stamped and signed. "Adoption?" The widow nodded. "I'm rich enough to silence judges and fast-track courts. That paper says they're yours, if you sign, but only under one condition." Tessaria's heart thudded. "What condition?" "You leave this ranch, take the boys, disappear east, and never claim the West again. This land is mine, and your kind, dirty girls with louder hearts than names, don't belong here." Calder's voice cut through the porch air like a rifle shot. "She belongs more than you ever did." He stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag, calm but seething. "This land don't bow to money. It remembers touch, kindness, voice. Hers is already in the floorboards." The widow turned to him with a sneer. "And what would a ranch hand know of law? Enough to know that paper ain't worth the ink if the boys don't choose her." As if summoned by fate, Whitley stepped out onto the porch, dirt-streaked and holding his wooden horse. "Mama?" Tessaria's knees buckled at the word. It was the first time he'd ever said it. The widow's face paled. "You've poisoned them." "No," Calder said softly. "They've been healed." The widow's hand trembled as she took back the paper, tore it once, twice, and let it scatter like dead leaves. Without another word, she climbed back into her buggy and vanished into the rising wind. Tessaria collapsed into the rocking chair, heart racing. Calder didn't speak, just stood beside her as Whitley climbed into her lap and laid his head on her chest. There were no gold coins on the porch, no signatures, no declarations. But in that quiet moment, everything had already been decided. The storm rolled in like a held breath finally exhaled. Tessaria stood by the window, watching it crawl across the prairie with silver threads and grumbling skies. It hadn't rained in weeks, not since she first stepped back onto the ranch, not since the boys had come home. The land had cracked, waited, hungered, just like them. But tonight, the sky opened. Calder burst through the door with a whoop, drenched from head to toe, laughing like a boy himself as the first fat drops began to fall. "We got it," he shouted. "We got the rain, Tess." Whitley and Aubin ran to the porch barefoot, arms stretched wide, spinning in the downpour like it was manna from heaven. Tessaria followed slowly, stepping into the curtain of water as if unsure it was real. But it was. Cold and cleansing and holy. Calder stood a few feet from her, hair plastered to his forehead, shirt clinging to his frame. "You ever danced in the rain?" he asked. "No." "First time for everything." She didn't move. "I don't know how." He took a step closer. "You don't need to know. Just trust." And he held out his hand. Slowly, cautiously, Tessaria took it, and suddenly she was laughing, spinning, barefoot in the mud with a man who didn't need anything from her but this moment, this living proof that she was not broken. The boys shouted and chased each other across puddles, their laughter echoing against the hills. The porch light flickered in the storm, casting a soft glow over the sodden wood. Calder twirled her once, then caught her, his arms steady and sure. She was soaked, shivering, but warm. "You're not what I expected," she whispered. "Neither are you," he said, "and I thank God for it every day." Her heart did something wild then, something dangerous, something she didn't quite have words for. But she didn't pull away. She let herself rest against his chest as the rain fell all around them, a baptism for a life they hadn't dared to name until now. "They called me nothing," she murmured. "For years, just the girl with the loud mouth and too many brothers." "Then let them hear your voice now," Calder said. "Let them hear it in every laugh, every step, every boy who calls you Mama." The rain washed away the dust, the doubts, the old names, and beneath it all, Tessaria felt something take root. A name that wasn't borrowed or bartered but fully hers. Not sister, not burden, not orphan, but mother. Woman. And maybe, just maybe, beloved. The sun rose soft the next morning, brushing golden light across the porch where 4 pairs of boots, small, muddied, and one too big, were lined up side by side. Inside, Tessaria stirred porridge over the stove, while Whitley and Aubin argued over who had caught more rain in their mouths. Calder sat by the hearth, mending a fence strap like he'd always belonged there. It felt still. Not loud, not desperate, just full. When she turned, Calder was watching her the way men sometimes looked at mountains, like he'd never be able to hold all of her in his hands, but he'd spend a lifetime trying. "There's something I've been thinking," he said, voice low, "and I figured I'd wait. But truth is, I don't want to." Her heart fluttered like it had the night before in the storm. She set the spoon down slowly. "Go on." He nodded at the boys. "They're yours, and now they're mine too, if you'll let 'em be. I've seen enough to know a good thing when it falls in my lap. I'm not rich, Tess, and I'm sure as sin not perfect. But this house could use a wife, and these boys a mother who doesn't just survive, but shines." Whitley gasped. Aubin dropped his spoon, and Tessaria just stood there, still as stone, trembling as thunder. "I don't need an answer now," he added, "but you'll have a ring on that windowsill by sundown. You pick it up if you want it, or leave it be and I'll stay just as I am. Either way, I ain't going nowhere." She didn't cry. Not this time. She just smiled, slow and astonished, and nodded. "Then you'd better make it a good ring, Calder." Hours later, when the chores were done and the boys were curled up on the rug beside the fire, Tessaria stepped quietly onto the porch. The rain had left behind the scent of life. Dirt and honeysuckle, something sweet and stubborn. And there, on the sill, lay the ring. It wasn't big, just silver, worn, carved with something she didn't recognize, but it was real, and it had waited for her. She slipped it on with a hand that no longer shook and whispered to the wind, "You can't take my brothers. Not anymore." And the wind, soft, warm, and certain, seemed to answer. You never had to ask again. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If someone tried to buy the only family you had left, would you have screamed too? Tell us in the comments.